She said it lightly, almost cheerfully. Perfect. I'm on vacation. You're in charge. But when the door closed behind her, the house felt heavier, like it was holding its breath. That was the moment I realized Christmas was no longer just a holiday, it was a quiet test. I had been married for 6 years, living in a modest house where the windows fogged easily in winter and silence lingered longer than it should. Christmas had always been something we shared, even when it was complicated. This year, though, my husband's family was coming, and his words, spoken without looking at me, shifted something unseen. What followed wasn't loud or dramatic, but it left marks all the same. The light in the kitchen was already turning soft when it happened. Late afternoon. That hour where the sun doesn't shine, it leans. It slid across the counter, catching the edge of a chipped mug, dust floating slow in the air like it had nowhere else to be. The kettle hadn't boiled yet. The house was quiet enough that I could hear the refrigerator breathing. He was standing near the sink, phone in his hand, thumb moving, eyes down. I was wiping the counter for the second time. Not because it was dirty, but because my hands needed something to do. That's when he said it casually, like he was commenting on the weather. Is my family coming for Christmas? He asked, still looking at the screen. Then, without waiting for my answer, he smiled. Just a little. Perfect. I'm on vacation. You're in charge. He didn't look at me. The words landed softly. Too softly. No thud. No echo. Just settled. Like dust on furniture you don't realize you've stopped using. I nodded. I don't remember deciding to. My head moved before my thoughts caught up. Yes, I said. Or maybe I just made a sound that meant agreement. He kept scrolling. I stood there, cloth in my hand, chest tightening in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not sharp, not painful, just compressed. Like the air had thinned without warning. The sun shifted, and the light slid off the counter, leaving the room a little dimmer. I became aware of the walls, the doorway, the ceiling fan ticking softly as it slowed. The house felt smaller all at once. Not physically, emotionally, like every wall had leaned in to listen. He said it like it was a compliment, like he trusted me, like I should be proud to be chosen. You're good at this stuff, he added, still not looking up. A kindness, maybe, or something that sounded like one. I waited for something else. A question, an offer to help. A pause that said we instead of you. Nothing came. The kettle began to whistle, then sharp, almost startled, and I moved too quickly to turn it off. My hand trembled just enough for me to notice. I poured the water slower than necessary. Watch steam rise and disappear. Watch how quickly heat leaves things when no one is paying attention. Behind me, he laughed at something on his phone. A real laugh. Easy. I hadn't heard that sound directed at me in a while. I told myself it was nothing. Just words. Just a plan. Just Christmas. But as I carried my cup to the table, I felt that quiet shift, like a chair being pulled away when you're not looking. I sat down alone, hands wrapped around the mug, warmth pressing into my palms. The kitchen ticked and hummed and pretended nothing had changed. But I knew, somewhere between that sentence and my silence, something had been handed to me without being asked. And for the first time, I wondered if responsibility was just another word for being left behind. Chapter title: Empty Evening. Script: 50 words. Evenings changed after that. Not all at once. Just enough for me to notice. The sun started setting earlier, slipping away before I was ready. By the time I turned on the lights, the house already felt tired. Yellow bulbs glowing softly, like they were trying not to wake anything that had gone quiet. I cooked dinner out of habit, not hunger. Habit has a way of pretending it knows what we need. The clock above the stove ticked louder at night. Each second sounded deliberate, like it wanted credit for passing. I set the table for two, then paused, hand hovering over the second plate. Some nights I left it there. Some nights I didn't. He was home. Just not here. He sat on the couch, television murmuring low, phone lighting his face blue and pale. I could hear the sound of scrolling, that soft flick like pages turning without meaning. "How was your day?" I asked once, standing in the doorway. "Busy," he said. Nothing else followed. I ate slower than usual, chewed carefully, listened to the way my fork touched a plate. Every sound felt amplified, like the house had fewer places for noise to hide. After dinner, I cleaned up alone. Water ran, plates clinked, the sink filled, then emptied. I wiped the counter and caught my reflection in the dark window. The glass showed me faintly, layered over the night outside. Porch light on, empty. Driveway, a woman floating between inside and out. I wondered when evenings had become something to get through instead of something to share. Later, I folded laundry on the couch while the television played a show neither of us was watching. His socks ended up in my lap. I folded them neatly anyway, paired them, set them aside. He didn't notice. The house cooled quickly after sunset. I pulled a cardigan tighter around myself. The heater clicked on, then off, like it couldn't decide if the effort was worth it. Some nights, I tried to talk. Small things. Grocery lists. A story I'd heard. A memory that surfaced without warning. He nodded, smiled politely, eyes still elsewhere. Other nights, I said nothing at all. Silence became easier. It asked less of me. I started cleaning things that didn't need cleaning. Straightening picture frames, dusting shelves, adjusting curtains by an inch. Anything to feel like I was contributing to something that mattered. The clock crept toward bedtime. I waited for him to say something, anything that sounded like togetherness. "Tomorrow," he said once, not unkindly, just distant. In bed, the space between us felt measured, intentional. Sheets cool where no one had been. His breathing steady, already halfway gone. I lay awake, listening to the house settle. Pipes knocking softly, wind brushing the windows. The quiet felt practiced, like it had been rehearsing long before I noticed. That's when the thought arrived. Slow, unwelcome. If I could disappear from these evenings, would anything really change? I stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned, holding that question carefully, the way you hold something fragile, because once you ask it, you can't pretend you didn't. The guest room was colder than the rest of the house. It always was. I opened the door just after breakfast, light spilling in from the hallway behind me. The curtains were still drawn, holding onto yesterday's darkness. The air smelled faintly of storage linen, dust, time. I stood there for a moment before turning on the lamp. As if the room needed warning, the light came on soft and yellow, settling into the corners without fully reaching them. The bed waited, bare and patient. Mattress smooth, no creases, like it hadn't been asked anything yet. I pulled fresh sheets from the closet. White, too white. They felt cool and stiff in my hands, creasing loudly as I shook them open. The sound filled the room, then fell flat. I made the bed slowly. Corners tucked just right, pillows fluffed, then fluffed again. Each movement felt like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. I imagined his mother standing in the doorway, arms folded, eyes scanning quietly, not unkind, just thorough. I imagined his sister sitting on the edge of the bed, phone already in her hand, deciding what to notice and what to ignore. I smoothed the blanket anyway. The mirror above the dresser caught me mid-motion. I looked thinner there, faded, like the room had already begun absorbing me. I paused, hands resting on the quilt I'd brought from the hall closet. Old, familiar, frayed at the edges. I hesitated before laying it down. The quilt had history. Stitches uneven in places, colors softened by years of washing and care. I wondered if it would be enough. I dusted the dresser, the nightstand, picked up a small lamp and turned it on, then off again, just to make sure it worked. Everything needed to work. Everything needed to be ready, because readiness felt like protection. The window rattled softly when a breeze passed through. I pushed. It closed, locking it with more force than necessary. Outside, the trees stood bare, branches scratching lightly at the sky. Winter didn't ask permission. It just arrived. I stepped back to take in the room. It looked right, inviting, thoughtful, like someone had been thinking about the people who would sleep there. I realized then how much effort I'd put into this space for people who didn't belong to me. The thought landed gently, but it stayed. I sat on the edge of the bed, quilt pulled around my hands. The mattress dipped under my weight, unfamiliar, temporary. This bed wasn't meant for me. I knew that. Still, I lingered. In the quiet, I could hear the house moving around me. Pipes ticking, a door closing somewhere. His footsteps, distant, heading toward another room. He didn't come in, didn't ask how it was going. I stood, smoothed the quilt one last time, and turned off the lamp. The room dimmed instantly, retreating back into itself. At the door, I paused, looked back once more. The guest room was ready, carefully prepared, waiting. I closed the door softly, almost respectfully, and wondered not for the first time who in this house was ever getting ready for me. I started making lists because the quiet needed shape, not long ones at first. Just scraps of paper on the counter, a pen resting beside them like it was waiting to be called on. Groceries, cleaning, things that had to be done before people arrived. And started noticing what hadn't been. Morning light came in thin and gray, barely touching the floor. I wrote while the coffee brewed, steam fogging the window in front of me. My handwriting leaned slightly to the right, like it was trying to keep moving. I showed him the first list while he tied his shoes. Just so we don't forget anything, I said. He glanced at it. A quick scan. Looks fine, he said, already halfway out the door. The door clicked shut behind him. The list stayed in my hand. More lists followed. Meals planned days ahead. Traditions his family liked, things I'd learned by watching, not by being told. Who drank what? Who didn't eat what time everything was supposed to happen. I left the papers on the kitchen table, neatly stacked. He passed them without stopping. Sometimes he nodded. Sometimes he did in single quotes. At tea night, I asked small questions. What day are they arriving? Do you think your mom still likes that pie? He answered vaguely, probably. Yeah, sure. His voice never rose, never softened. It stayed even, like he didn't want to disturb anything. The space between us filled with unfinished sentences. Things I almost said. Things I edited before they reached my mouth. It felt easier to adjust myself than to risk asking for more. Silence became something we shared without agreeing to it. I noticed how often I filled it, moving, cleaning, organizing. If my hands were busy, I didn't have to hear the quiet as much. I folded napkins into careful stacks, rearranged cabinets that already worked, straightened the calendar on the fridge. He sat nearby, scrolling, present, but distant. One evening, I handed him a list and waited, just stood there. He read it this time, slowly. Then he smiled. You've got it handled, he said. The words were meant to reassure. I knew that, but they landed heavy. Handled meant alone. Handled meant settled. Handled meant done without discussion. I nodded, like I always did. Later, I crossed items off the list one by one. The pen made small, final lines. Each check mark felt like proof, not of progress, of endurance. The house grew quieter as Christmas crept closer. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. The kind that presses. I sat at the table long after dinner. Lists spread out in front of me, edges curling slightly. I stared at them until the words blurred. In the silence, a question formed, gentle, persistent. When did partnership turn into planning alone? I folded the lists carefully and stacked them again, not ready to throw them away, not ready to stop, because if I stopped preparing, I might have to admit what the quiet was already telling me. The doorbell rang just as the sky finished darkening. That thin moment between evening and night when the cold feels sharper because the light is gone. I wiped my hands on a dish towel I didn't need and walked to the door, heart already moving faster than my feet. When I opened it, the cold rushed in first. Then his mother. She stood there in a long coat, hair set carefully, suitcase upright, at her side like it had been trained to wait. Her smile arrived before she did, practiced, polite. There you are, she said, stepping inside without pausing. Her eyes moved past me, into the house, taking inventory before the door even closed. I stepped back to make room. The door clicked shut behind her. The house shifted with her presence. The air changed, like it knew company had arrived. "You found the place all right?" I asked. She nodded. "Of course," she said, already shrugging off her coat. I reached for it, unsure if she expected me to. I hung it neatly in the closet, smoothing the sleeve without thinking. She walked slowly through the living room, fingers brushing the back of the couch, eyes lingering on shelves, corners, small details. She didn't comment right away. That almost felt worse. "It's nice," she said finally, a pause. "Very organized." I smiled. "Thank you." My husband came in then, lighter somehow, voice warmer. He hugged her easily, fully, the way you hug someone you don't feel the need to prepare for. "You made it," he said. "Of course I did," she replied, patting his arm. "I knew you two had everything handled." She looked at me when she said it, just briefly. Handled. I led her to the guest room. The door opened softly, like it was holding its breath. She stepped inside, setting her suitcase at the foot of the bed. Her eyes moved quickly. Sheets, quilt, lamp, window. She nodded once. "This will do." It wasn't unkind, just final. I lingered in the doorway, waiting for something else. A question, a smile that stayed. She began unpacking immediately, folding clothes with practiced precision. I backed away quietly. In the kitchen, I poured tea I wasn't sure she wanted. My hands shook just enough for the spoon to clink against the cup. I steadied it with both hands. From the living room, I heard laughter, his voice mixed with hers. Familiar, easy. I carried the tray in carefully, setting it down on the table. "Oh, you didn't have to," she said, though she reached for the cup anyway. "It's no trouble," I replied. She sipped, nodded. "Nice," she said. Then, "You've been busy." I nodded again. That word busy hung between us. Not praise, not criticism, just an observation. As the evening settled in, I moved around them, adjusting lights, clearing space, filling silences before they could grow awkward. I watched from the edges as they talked, as memories were shared that didn't include me, as the house welcomed her more easily than it ever welcomed my uncertainty. Later, when I finally sat down, my seat felt borrowed, temporary. I smiled when expected, listened closely, stayed alert, because the first arrival had passed and already I felt like I was being tested on how well I could disappear. The kitchen light stayed on long after it needed to. I stood at the counter with my back to the living room, listening to voices rise and fall behind me. Laughter moved easily there, full, unguarded, the kind that doesn't stop to check who's listening. I rinsed vegetables that were already clean, let the water run longer than necessary. It gave my hands an excuse to stay busy. From the corner of my eye, I saw them gathered on the couch, his mother leaning in, his sister curled comfortably at the end. My husband sat between them, shoulders relaxed, face open in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. He looked like himself again, or maybe this was always who he was. I chopped slowly, each slice deliberate. The knife met the board with a steady rhythm, soft, controlled, a sound I could focus on. "Do you remember that Christmas with the storm?" his sister said. He laughed, a real laugh. "God, yes," he said. "The power was out for hours." I waited for him to look toward the kitchen. He did end single quotes. No one asked if I needed help. No one stood up. The story kept moving without me, like a train I hadn't boarded in time. I stirred a pot that hadn't started boiling yet. Steam hadn't risen, but I stirred anyway, watching the surface shift and settle. The smell of food filled the room, warm, familiar. Something I knew how to make, something I could offer. When I carried the dish into the living room, the conversation paused, just for a second, enough for me to feel it. "Oh," his mother said, "that looks good." I set it down carefully. "Dinner's almost ready," I said. They thanked me, smiled, then turned back to each other. I returned to the kitchen. From there, I watched them through the doorway. Watch how my husband leaned closer to his sister when she spoke. Watch how his mother nodded approvingly at something he said. I felt like a shadow cast by the light behind me, present, but not noticed unless I moved. The dishes piled slowly, in the sink. I washed as I went, the water hot enough to sting. It felt grounding. Honest.at point, I caught my reflection in the microwave door. Just a flash. Me standing there, apron tied too tight, eyes tired. I straightened my shoulders. Dinner came and went. Plates were passed. Compliments offered. I ate quietly, tasting little. Every bite felt rushed, like I was eating between tasks instead of part of the meal. When I stood to clear the table, my husband started to rise. "I've got it," I said quickly. He sat back down without protest. That hurt more than I expected. Later, as I rinsed the last plate, the house hummed with contentment behind me. Television on low, familiar voices overlapping. Comfortable. I dried my hands slowly, listened to the sound fade. From the kitchen doorway, I looked at them one more time. All of them together, at ease. I realized then how easy it was to disappear. Not by leaving, but by staying useful. And as I turned off the kitchen light, I wondered how long I could stand in the dark, watching life happen just a few steps away. I woke before the house did. The sky outside was still pale, undecided. That soft gray that comes before morning commits. I lay still for a moment, listening. No footsteps, no voices. Just the faint hum of the heater and the sound of my own breathing. The tree lights were still on in the living room. I'd forgotten to switch them off the night before. They glowed quietly, reflected in the dark window like something trying to keep watch. I slipped out of bed without waking him. The floor was cold under my feet. It creaked once softly, like it remembered other mornings. I wrapped my cardigan tighter and walked into the kitchen, turning on the smallest light. Enough to see, not enough to announce myself. Coffee first, always coffee. The machine gurgled awake, louder than I expected. I winced, then waited. The house didn't stir. I stood at the counter while it brewed, hands resting on the edge, looking toward the living room. The tree stood there, full and finished, gifts tucked neatly underneath, tags faced outward, names written carefully, none of them mine. The smell of coffee filled the room, warm and grounding. I poured myself a cup and sat at the table alone. The chair across from me stayed empty. I didn't reach for it this time. When the others finally woke, it happened gradually. A door opening, footsteps, his mother's voice, already alert, his sister laughing softly at something I missed. "Morning," I said as they entered. "Merry Christmas," his mother replied, smiling. I handed out mugs, added sugar where I knew it was wanted, milk where it was expected. My movements felt practiced, smooth. He kissed my cheek in passing. Quick, absent-minded. "Morning," he said. They gathered around the tree, sitting easily on the floor, backs against the couch. I stood for a moment, unsure where to place myself, then sat at the edge. Gifts were passed around. Paper tore. Laughter rose and fell. I watched faces light up, hands moving quickly, gratitude spoken aloud. I smiled when I should, clapped softly, commented where expected. And no one noticed my hands were empty. At one point, his mother looked at me and said, "You really outdid yourself this year." I nodded. "Thank you." It wasn't about the gifts. I knew that. But the space where mine should have been felt louder than the wrapping paper. Breakfast followed. Plates warmed. The table filled. I moved between stove and counter, refilling, adjusting, making sure nothing ran low. "Sit," his sister said once. "You've done enough." I sat for a minute, then someone needed something, and I stood again. By late morning, the light outside had sharpened. The house buzzed with conversation and comfort. Traditions retold, plans made for the rest of the day. I caught my reflection in the window again, the tree lights blinking behind me. My face calm, smile steady. From the outside, it must have looked perfect, but standing there, holding a dish towel I didn't need, I felt it, that quiet truth. I had given everything required of me this morning, everything expected. And somehow, Christmas still passed right through me, like I was never meant to be open. It happened after breakfast, when the house was warm and full. Plates had been cleared. Coffee cups lingered on side tables, the kind of comfortable mess people leave behind when they know someone else will take care of it. I stood near the counter, folding a dish towel in half, then in half again. No reason. Just something to hold. His sister leaned back on the couch, legs tucked under her, phone resting in her palm. She glanced toward the kitchen, then smiled quick, casual. "You're really good at this," she said. A pause. "I don't know how you managed to do it all so quietly." She laughed softly at the end, like it was a compliment that didn't need an answer. The room laughed with her. Not loudly, just enough. My husband smiled, not at me, at her. I felt the comment land before I fully understood it. Not sharp, not cruel, just careless. The kind of thing said without thinking about where it might settle. Quietly, I smiled too. A second late. My face knew what to do even if my chest didn't. "Oh, I don't mind," I said. I heard my voice. Calm, pleasant, almost convincing. She nodded, satisfied, already turning back to her phone. The moment passed. Conversation moved on. Plans for the afternoon. A walk, maybe a visit somewhere. I stood there a beat longer than necessary. Quietly. The word echoed in my head. Quietly. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed questions, about how often I'd stepped aside instead of forward, how silence had become something I wore well enough that people mistook it for strength. The towel slipped from my hands, fell to the floor without sound, and no one noticed. I bent to pick it up, my fingers brushing the tile. Cold, solid, real. I stayed down there a moment longer than I needed to. Let the floor steady me. When I stood again, the room looked the same. Same light, same faces, same ease. But something in me had shifted just enough to feel it. I moved toward the bathroom, murmuring something about needing a minute. My husband nodded without looking up. The door closed softly behind me. The mirror caught me immediately. No warning. I looked fine, hair in place, eyes a little tired. Nothing dramatic, nothing broken, but I leaned closer, resting my hands on the sink, and for the first time that day, I let my face fall quietly. I mouthed the word again. Quietly. It didn't feel gentle. It felt erasing. I straightened, smoothed my sweater, practiced the smile once more. The mirror gave it back to me, obedient. Before leaving the bathroom, I took one slow breath, then another, because whatever that comment had been meant to say, I finally heard what it was asking of me. To keep being invisible. To keep being grateful. To keep being quiet. I opened the door and stepped back into the noise, carrying that realization carefully, like something fragile, like something I wasn't sure I could keep holding much longer. The bathroom light buzzed faintly when I turned it on. Too bright at first, too honest. I closed the door gently behind me, the click of the latch sounding louder than it should have. The noise from the living room softened instantly, like it had been filtered through water. I leaned against the sink and let my hands rest there. Cold porcelain, steady, the kind of cold that reminds you where you are. The mirror waited. I didn't look up right away. I focused on the small things instead: the hairline crack in the tile near the baseboard, the faint ring at the bottom of the soap dispenser, the hum of the vent pulling air that didn't need pulling. When I finally lifted my eyes, she was already there. Me. But not the version everyone else had been seeing all morning. My smile was gone. My mouth rested in its natural shape, slightly downturned, like it had been holding something heavy for too long. The skin around my eyes looked thinner under this light. Tired, but not from lack of sleep, from carrying. I leaned closer, elbows bending, palms flat on the counter. The mirror didn't flinch. It took me in without comment. I thought about the comment again. The way it had been said so easily, quietly, like it was something admirable, like silence was a skill I'd perfected on purpose. My throat tightened, but nothing came up. No tears, just pressure. I tried to remember the last time I'd raised my voice in this house. Tried to remember the last time I'd taken up space without apologizing for it. The memories didn't come easily. Behind the door, laughter rose again. Someone said my name casually, asking where I'd gone. The sound reached me, softened, rounded at the edges. "I'll be right there," I called back. My voice sounded normal. That startled me. I reached for a tissue I didn't need and pressed it lightly under my eyes. Just in case. Old habit. Preparedness. The woman in the mirror watched me do it. She didn't look impressed. I dropped the tissue into the trash and straightened. Smoothed my sweater. Adjusted my collar like it might change something deeper. For a moment, I let myself imagine another version of this day. One where I said something back. One where I laughed louder than necessary. One where I asked for help and waited for it to arrive. The image felt distant, like a story I used to know. I rested my forehead briefly against the mirror. Cool glass. A small mercy. I closed my eyes and counted my breaths. In, out. When I opened them again, the woman staring back at me looked steadier, not happier, just resolved. I nodded at her once. A quiet agreement. Whatever had been forming in me all morning had finally taken shape. Not anger, not blame, awareness. I turned off the light and opened the door. The warmth of the house rushed back in. Voices wrapped around me again, familiar and demanding. As I stepped into the living room, no one noticed the shift. No one paused. The day kept moving, but I felt it clear and undeniable. The mirror had seen me, and now that I had too, I wasn't sure I could go back to being unseen. It happened after the house finally settled. Plates were stacked in the dishwasher. Lights dimmed one by one. His family had gone to bed. Doors closed gently, their sleep arriving quickly, like they belonged here. We sat in the living room with only the lamp on. Its light pooled low, leaving the corners of the room untouched. The television was off. The quiet felt intentional now, heavy but earned. He sat on one end of the couch. I sat on the other. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The space between us held the day, every laugh I hadn't joined, every task I'd finished unnoticed. I need to say something, I said finally. My voice was calm. That surprised me. He nodded, eyes still on his hands. Okay. I folded my fingers together, unfolded them. The skin felt dry, stretched thin. I felt alone today, I said, not accusing, just true. I know everyone's here, and it's busy, but I felt like I disappeared. He looked up then. His expression softened, just a little. That wasn't my intention, he said quickly. I know, I replied, and I meant it. The words sat between us, not arguing, just existing. You're really good at handling things, he added after a moment. I don't know how you manage it all. There it was again, the praise that felt like a wall. I breathed in slowly. That's the problem, I said. I don't want to manage it alone. He frowned, confused but not unkind. I thought you liked being in charge. I shook my head. Small, careful. I like being included. The lamp hummed softly. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked as someone shifted in their sleep. He leaned back, running a hand over his face. I didn't think, he began, then stopped. I know, I said again. Silence followed. Not the empty kind, the kind that waits. Finally, he looked at me, really looked. His eyes searched my face like he was trying to read something he'd skipped before. I guess I assumed, he said, that if you didn't say anything, everything was fine. The words didn't hurt. They clarified. I've been saying things, I replied gently, just not out loud. He nodded slowly. The weight of that settled in his shoulders. I'm sorry, he said, quiet, real. I believed him. That surprised me too. We sat there a little longer, not touching, but not distant either. The space between us felt different now, visible, acknowledged. Eventually, he stood and turned off the lamp. Darkness filled the room, soft and complete. As we walked toward the bedroom, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not resolved, not fixed, but named. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself wonder not whether he would change, but whether I would keep speaking, even when my voice trembled, because tonight, quiet had finally broken. And it didn't shatter the house. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. I walked through rooms that had been alive only hours ago. Chairs pushed back, Wrapping paper crumpled in corners. Plates still cooling on the counters. The air smelled faintly of pine, sugar, and yesterday's laughter, lingering like it had nowhere else to go. I paused in the living room. The tree lights were off, but shadows still danced across the wall. They looked like echoes of the voices that had filled the space. I could almost hear the laughter, the soft teasing, the way they had all leaned into each other so easily. I ran my fingers along the arm of the couch. The fabric felt the same, but the warmth was gone. Even the quiet felt sharper now, like the house itself was noticing my presence more acutely. I walked to the guest room first, closed the door slowly. It was empty. Perfect. I had made it ready, kept it ready. And now it was just a room, not welcoming, not demanding, just waiting for someone who would not come again until another holiday dot in the kitchen. I picked up the last dish and washed it, letting the water run a little longer than needed. Steam rose, curling in the light, small and patient. I dried my hands and let them rest on the counter, thinking about how much of the day had passed without anyone noticing my hands at all. He moved through the house behind me, quiet this time. He didn't reach for my shoulder. He didn't offer words, just a soft click of his shoes against the floor. I realized then that the season hadn't ended for them, it had ended for me. But in that ending, there was something else. I could see it if I wanted to. The table was cleared, wrapping stored, cookies packed away. The house still smelled like Christmas, but it was my own silence that had settled deepest. A soft kind of peace. I walked to the window and looked out. The sky was pale with early evening, soft gray fading into blue. Trees swayed gently in the wind. The world had moved on while I was still here, standing, breathing, noticing everything that had happened. In ways no one else had. I thought about the quiet conversation from the night before, about the small realizations, the careful words, the awareness I had finally allowed myself. He hadn't changed entirely, and neither had I. But something shifted. I sat on the couch, letting my back press into the cushions. The house was mine. Again, fully mine, in the way it had never felt while others had been here. And yet, I didn't feel alone, not completely, because I had discovered something subtle but permanent, the ability to carry my own presence, to let my voice exist quietly, without anyone else having to recognize it. I looked at the darkened tree. Shadows stretched across the floor. My reflection in the window was faint, layered with light. I smiled just a little. Tomorrow, the house would wake again. The dishes would pile. The list would need updating. The world would ask for my presence in a dozen small ways. But tonight, I let the quiet linger. Tonight, I let it remind me of something I had almost forgotten, that being here, fully seen by myself, was enough. The house breathed with me, and for the first time, it felt like we were both home.